Welcome to Programming with Professor Califf. Today I want to talk about overloading methods in Java. So overloaded methods are actually something we've been using, and now we want to really focus on what's going on there and how we write them. So the idea of a method that is overloaded is that we have methods, more than one method, with the same name but different signatures. So what do I mean by a method signature? The signature is basically the number and type of the arguments that the method takes. So those parameters, how many do we have? What type are they? One example that we've seen is in our savings account constructors. So if we look at our savings account class diagram, remember that we started out with 3 different constructors. One that took no parameters, our default constructor, one that took 1 parameter, our starting balance, and one that took 2 parameters, the starting balance and a special interest rate. And we can have all 3 of these because of method overloading. We've also seen this with the string class. So if we look at, for instance, the index of method, there are really at least 4 index of methods in the string class. One that takes a string to look for, one that takes a string and also tells you where in the string to start, in case you want to start other than 0 to find the next one. One that takes a character to look for, and one that takes a character and a start. And these are all different signatures. These 2 both have 1, the first and the third, but they're different types of data. And the second and the fourth each have 2, which makes them different from the first and the third. They're also different from each other because one has a string for the first one and one has a char. So these are all different methods with the same name and related functionality. Now sometimes we want to do some overloading that doesn't actually work. So here I have a method with 2 parameters, both of them ints, that returns an integer. Then I have a different version of that method with the same name that has, again, 2 other parameters, but both of them are type int. This one returns a double. I can't actually do that. I can't change just the return type. I have to change something about the type or number of my parameters themselves. I can have a different return type, but I have to have also changed something in the parameter types or number. Okay, I want to try this out, sort of show you what this actually ends up looking like with specifically the constructors in the savings account class. So we're going to flesh that out a little bit more. So here we have our savings account that we were working on before as we started writing our own classes. And I want to go ahead here and add our second instance variable that we originally had, which was an interest rate. Then I want to start looking at some different constructors. So at this point, our interest rate isn't being used anywhere and doesn't have a value. So the first thing I want to do is to create a version of the savings account that takes both of those parameters. So it both sets the starting balance and a non-default interest rate. So that's going to be public savings account, just like every other constructor. But we're going to have 2 parameters. One's going to be the starting balance, and the other will be that interest rate, which I'm just going to call int rate so that it's not exactly the same. Only that's bothering me. I'm going to go ahead and spell it out and just use this because I don't like that name. We know how to write something, and so we're going to get balance is assigned starting balance, and this dot interest rate to make sure we get the one that is the instance variable and we're not just assigning this to itself. This dot interest rate is assigned interest rate, So that's great. And we've done that, and we have one that takes 1 and one that takes 2. Now, one thing that we often will consider is that I actually need an interest rate. If I'm going to have the interest rate, I want to also make sure it gets initialized for here. So I'm going to do something called chaining constructors. So here I'm good. I have the 2 different versions. Of course, I could create a constructor for this comment for this one. So constructor that takes all data, and I can put in my descriptions for my parameters. Oops. For this account. But then I need to also set the interest rate here. So interest rate is assigned whatever my default interest rate was, which I think I had sort of 0.015 maybe. I would think I was pretty generous. Now you can see that we're duplicating code. Here we've only got 2 instance variables, so it's not a big deal. But if we have lots of instance variables, here we just have 2 instance variables, so it's not a big deal that we're duplicating this. But if we start making changes, if we needed to do some validation, various things, we might find ourselves duplicating quite a bit of code when we do this. So one of the things that we do when we are doing what's called constructor overloading is we will do what we call constructor chaining. And that can look one of 2 ways. I'm going to go ahead and do it where I have the constructor that takes the most variables as the base of my chain. So I'm going to leave this one as it is, and then I'm going to call it from the savings account that only takes 1 parameter. So the way I do that is I actually say this, and then I'm going to give it starting balance. And then I'm going to just put in that value I want to have for the default interest rate here. Then I'm going to do something kind of similar for the default constructor. I'm going to go ahead and make that first constructor that we listed. It doesn't take any parameters. It's just going to put us in a default state. And so we're again going to call this, or actually what we'll do is we'll go ahead and call this one and just say, okay, this, and we're going to set the balance to 0. That's going to automatically get this. So let's watch what happens when we actually call this. What I'm going to do is go over to my application, and let's try calling some different ones of these. So I'm going to have, let's first of all change this one so that it actually takes its own special rate. So 0.02. That's a crazy savings account these days. And let's also create one that takes no parameters. Savings, well, it'll do it for me. Account 3 is new savings account. So let's use the debugger. I'm going to set it up to start right away. And let's debug this and see what happens with our code as we go through this. So here we're on savings account. I'm going to step in so I can see what's going on with my constructors. So I'm going to come in here, and we know the starting balance is 500. And I'm now going to step into again, because this is a call to that other constructor. So when we step in, we see that we're here with the constructor that takes 2 parameters. So now let's start stepping, and we'll do a step over here. When we get to this assignment statement. We do this assignment statement. We see balance change. We then set the interest rate with that interest rate here that we passed in. And that's all happy, fine. It comes back here. And we're back here. And account 1 has now been made. And if we open it up over here, we see that it has the data it should have. So let's see what happens if we call the one that takes 2 parameters. Then we're just going to come straight here and we can go through that and we see that all get set up with the data that we passed in. And we can open that up and see that it has the data that it should have. Then if we go into account 3, we're going to see it's calling the one with 1. We go into that. We see that that then is going to call the one with 2. And we can go from there. That'll set it up with 0 and 0.15. And that one. Then we work our way out of the constructors. And that we see is set up, again, just as we would expect it to be. This is called constructor chaining. There are other times when we're doing overloaded methods when we might call one of the other versions of the method to get some pieces of the work done. One thing to notice about constructors in particular is they only work to call another constructor if it's the very first line. So let's go ahead and stop what we were doing there. And we'll notice that this is the first line. This is the first line. If we have multiple lines and we put this later, that won't work. You will see people chain constructors in the opposite direction, where they start out with sort of nothing done and they're adding things, calling previous ones. The other way around. Either way can work, but it's generally recommended that we chain constructors one way or the other so that we avoid doing extra work. So overloaded methods are pretty straightforward. We're really just writing a method like any other method. We're just writing multiple methods that have the same name but slightly different parameters. Overloading constructors, we do want to know about this constructor chaining concept and use it to avoid redoing work. And we want to think about that when we're doing other kinds of method overloading. We want to always avoid writing code twice. So just one of those basic principles. Write the code once if at all possible. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.